You're listening to LeaderCast, episode 121. Welcome to LeaderCast, Transforming Missions podcast with Tim Bias and Sara Thomas, providing you with insights and resources you need to lead a movement of Jesus followers.
Well, Christian leaders want to be liked. We say it's human nature. You might say it a different way. We sometimes look for affirmation or praise or even to be rewarded. But what I know is, or what we all know is that when decisions are made from a place of being liked, the decisions are often not helpful, faithful, let alone missional.
So today we want to talk with you about the one decision that you must make.
Wait a minute. Just one decision?
Just one.
Well, why just one?
I will answer that in just 1 minute. Let me remind you first that you can find show notes for this episode at transformingmission.org/121. I'll also remind you to hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast player so that all of our latest episodes are waiting for you when you open up that podcast player. Now, to answer your question, Tim, about why just one decision, in times like what we're living in, times like we've never lived in before, and in any crisis, I guess that's the easiest way to say it, it's not a time to lay out 20-page, a 10-page, even a 5-page strategic plan. What needs to be happening in this moment is to help the people entrusted to their care take one next step, one step at a time. It's all that you need to do.
So what is that next step?
Well, I'm glad that you asked. Several weeks ago, as you and I were talking, Tim, I said something that sounded harsh and sounds harsh, but it had a much deeper meaning and continues to have a much deeper meaning. The statement that I made, again, it was harsh, but it's spoken in truth. Our pastors and our local church leaders, this was my statement. Are you willing to be responsible for the death of one or more of the people in your congregation?
Now, Sara, that does sound shocking, but you put it into a context. So what's the context?
Yeah, the context is this. What is your witness during this time? If you're going to love God and love your neighbor, what decisions are you going to make? And I got there by pausing to ask myself, what is the most important thing, most important decision right now?
And right, for right now, but that would also be always, right?
Right. It's always important to love God and love our neighbor. I was simply asking this question in the midst of my daily life, my daily context, and thinking about the leaders that we work with. So, as we often do, today we want to invite you to consider your current life and leadership. And here's the one decision that you must make. What do you want your witness to be?
Okay. What do you want your witness to be? As Jesus followers and as leaders who help people follow Jesus, your life and leadership are bearing witness at a remarkable rate right now. It's kind of like you're under a magnifying glass and people are watching. We're going to walk you through 5 things to consider as you answer the question, what is your witness? That's the one decision that you must make. What is your witness?
Yeah, and Tim, you said that it feels like you're under a microscope. And so I think that's at one end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum, there's also this beautiful thing that's happening right now because so many people are streaming worship on Facebook right now, or putting things out on YouTube, or going live and praying on Facebook, that there are people that are encountering you and therefore encountering faith that have not, will not, would never, whatever word you want to use there, you pick it, walk into a church building. And yet, right now, they are searching for something, and they have an opportunity to encounter Jesus in and through you. And so I think about that as what an amazing opportunity. What a beautiful way to invite people into a relationship with Christ and with a community and with the church on their terms. And so as we think about this question of what is your witness, when I think about what I am seeing happen, there's a whole lot more faith that is happening in the places that, there's a whole lot more faith sharing, let me say it that way, that is happening in the places that people are hanging out. And where are we hanging out? We're hanging out on technology, because that's still where we can gather in groups. What is your witness going to be? So here are the 5 things that we want you to think about. The first one is, are you, and is the community that you lead, if it is a church, if it is a business, whatever, if it's a family, are you clear on your commission?
So you're using the idea of the Great Commission to make disciples of Jesus Christ, and as part of what we live with is make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. That is really our great commission. We may call it a mission, but that's really what we're about. So your question then, Sarah, I think is, who's responsible for carrying out that commission or that mission right now? Or what does success look like in the midst of a pandemic when we have this great opportunity that you're talking about?
Yeah, and as you think about what your witness is going to be, people knowing what they're responsible for and what success looks like in living into the Great Commission is what will help them to know, okay, this is how we are going to witness. And I'm using that word in so many different ways, but how are people going to receive and see who you are and what you believe? If there isn't clarity about who is responsible for what right now, and if there isn't clarity about what success looks like, there was a time not too long ago that, how did we measure? I wouldn't even say it was measure. It was about counting. We counted the number of people who showed up and sat in seats in a church building. And if that number went up, we said that we were successful. If that number went down, we said that we weren't. Now, I would say that that's faulty logic to begin with, because you're counting people, you're not counting transformation. So what might begin to happen now if you said that success is that we're building 5 new relationships with people that we didn't have each week, and we're helping people who are already connected to the faith community to live into that. And so if that's what you're seeking to do, and if that's what success is, how are you going to go about doing that?
I like that question, Sarah. What I'm thinking of something very fundamental at this point. We've talked about it before, but it seems to me it would be a very concrete way of saying to the community, as well as to people in the church, that you care about them, that you love them, you're taking them seriously, and that is, you actually wear a mask in public.
Right.
I mean, I know that is not in the Scripture. I know that the Scripture says, love God, love neighbor, wear your mask. I know that that's not there. But how do you do that in the context of what we're in right now? A very simple way is that you're taking others seriously. And that's part of what loving your neighbor is about.
Yeah. And so for us, let's back up and let's drill down on what led us to the place where we decided that our commission for this time, how we were going to articulate that, was in and through loving God and loving our neighbor. That was our way of saying what we're going to focus on right now is reminding the leaders that we're responsible for to stay focused on loving God and loving your neighbor. So Tim's just given you one way that you can do that. Another way is to ask the question, what's the most loving thing that we can do here? If you want to build relationships with 5 people in a week to help them experience the love of God, they might not say that they're a believer in Jesus, but just sharing the love of God. How are you going to do that in the world that we're living in right now? It might be that you say to the people in your community, hey, we have a Facebook live stream. I'd love for you to join us. And when you show up, just say, Tim, it's Sara. I'm here. And then I'll know that you're there and we can have more conversation. I don't know what the answer is. You all are more creative than I am with those things. But to begin thinking about what's the most loving thing that you can do here. Another thing that we've talked about, and we've probably said this question many times on the podcast, is to pause and ask yourself, are people doing the best they can? Before Tim and I jumped on to record this podcast, where I live, the Amazon delivery people have a horrible, horrible time finding my place. It's just an ongoing saga. And I roll my eyes and I get irritated. And then I pause and ask that question, are they doing the best they can? Yeah, they are. They have no idea. The layout of where I live is crazy. There's a good reason they can't find it. They're doing the best that they can. And in a time where tension tends to be high because people are under a lot of stress, we tend to jump at things and get irritated by things. And pausing to ask the question, are people doing the best that they can, is a question that I have been asking to say, okay, am I loving God and am I loving my neighbor in this moment? So we're just trying to give you a couple of ideas here.
Now, you've done well. Even though I jumped ahead, you're keeping us focused, which is what we're talking about, loving God and loving neighbor as the most important focus right now. So thank you.
So let us give you a couple of other things to consider as you think about what's your witness going to be. Another thing that you might consider is, do the teams, your staff, and the ministries know where they fit into the overall mission? And can they articulate why they do what they do?
So Sara, the thing that comes to mind when you ask that question is another question, but it's like this. Have you taken advantage of this opportunity to help people get a clear understanding of the focus of the witness that they have? I think, and I'm speaking out of my own experience, but I think one of the things we do is just assume that people know. And we're in the midst of a crisis that allows us to step back and really lay some new track, if we want to say it that way, in regard to being faithful in that witness, or keeping the focus on loving God and loving neighbor. So what's behind your question then is, do the people with whom you're working, those who are making decisions, those who are communicating, do they understand? Can they articulate the focus?
And it might even be that what begins to happen is people look at one another and say, why are we doing this? Because it's not something that is directly related to the mission. Another thing that I have begun to see happening is, as we have not been gathering physically together in worship and have been worshiping virtually, people talking about feeling a disconnection from God and a disconnection from faith, or trying to find new ways to connect with God. And part of what I'm hearing underneath what they're saying is that for them, participating in the gathered body that we call the church has been an activity. How we have taught folks to take personal responsibility for their own faith development is being challenged in this time, because the answer to that is we haven't in many situations. And so there's this longing and there's this loss of, it's not just that we're worshiping online, because we can still see people, we can still participate in worship. And it's not just the seeing people in real life. There's something much deeper that people are missing. We haven't helped people take responsibility for their own faith journey.
So I'm being a bit facetious, and then I want to say something about that. So you're saying we haven't taught people to feed themselves. They're always looking for the next best thing to make them feel good, or so that's part of the struggle.
Yeah, it's almost the same conversation that I hear when there's a change of pastors, or there's different music being played, or the organist is off for a week and now somebody's playing on a piano, and so we don't like the music, or we don't like the sound of the new preacher's voice, or we don't like the cadence that the preacher preaches in. And all of those things are superficial distractions from the real meaning of being there. Why do any of those things matter? If you're there to worship God, how does that often get expressed? Well, I'm not being fed. Bingo. This is the time that helping people to learn to feed themselves. So it might be that you're spending more time on helping folks to explore the spiritual disciplines. How do you read the scriptures? What are different forms of prayer? What does it look like to worship daily? What does it look like to encounter God in your everyday life? What does it look like to serve? And helping folks to do that and experiment with that and begin to take ownership of that, so that they can, as individuals, as teams, as groups, as a staff, as a local congregation, you're answering this bigger question of everybody understands how what they are doing fits into the overall mission of the local congregation. So
here's the thing that comes to mind, and it's not exactly what you're talking about, but just another question with the people who are listening. How many of you were actually having prayer meetings every morning or every evening before the pandemic? Now, how many of us now can be online at 8 in the morning, 7 in the morning, 8 in the morning, 9 in the morning, or sometimes in the evening, and have somebody we know praying for us?
Right.
That's part of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
The next step in that is, how do the people who are around us, who have responsibility for other parts of the life of a congregation or work or a family, how are they now being included in that bigger picture of loving God and loving neighbor? That's the other thing you're saying, I think.
Yeah, and you're taking us to the next point of, how are you co-creating meaning? How are you co-creating what is happening right now? And it's very easy in this time. Tim and I are recording this, and we've always recorded the podcast virtually over Skype. But it's real easy when you're sitting in your own places to think, this is all on me, instead of remembering that you have a community around you. And so how are you doing that together? And how are you enlisting the gifts and graces of other people, so that, again, back to our big question, what's your witness going to be? You're empowering people to be the disciples that God is inviting them to be, so that the world around them can be transformed. It's not just about you. This is a time that we have an opportunity to create a shared culture and a shared meaning. And the places that I have witnessed teams of people coming together to make what is happening right now happen, it's where there is not only the most life, but it's where people are getting to know one another at deeper levels, that they're having encounters with Jesus in different ways, and that they're learning that their gifts might not be best suited for one aspect of this time, but are really well suited for another area of need in this time, and so that they can focus on that. I recognize that in saying that, some of you who are listening are going to say, well, I don't have anybody who can. And all I'm going to say to you is, have you asked? Has an invitation been offered? Because some of the most tech-savvy people that I know are retired folks who have been using technologies in ways that we never knew. I know stories of people that that helped their local school system get online because of what they knew and did. And I would have never thought that they would have been the people who were doing that. So we have to ask, and the invitation has to be there. And please don't just ask once, because you may ask once and there might not be a response. But if you ask again, and then again and again, together, you'll get to that place of that someone is willing to step up. Again, this can only happen when there is a common understanding of what your commission is, what you are focused on, and that people know what you're working towards. Otherwise, I'm going to say something and I'm going to regret saying it, but I'm going to say it anyway. You have a million different agendas, and they're personal agendas and personal preferences that are being played out. And so when we find resistance in this area, it's often because the first two things that we talked about have not been tended to. And so you have a whole lot of agendas that are playing out in your midst, and there isn't a focus to have a shared meaning or co-create a meaning of what is happening right now.
Sarah, one of the things that I'm thinking, and I haven't thought it through enough, but you've stirred it up within me again, and that is in loving God and loving neighbor. And I think we have a couple of examples that we can use beyond what we've done. But we have a global pandemic, and we're living it out locally. And much of what we are experiencing right now tells us about our worldview, whether it's ourselves or the people around us who are saying, it's not important if you wear a mask and it's a hoax, it's whatever. That's kind of a local kind of thought. When there are people who are saying, we've got to do this for the good of humanity, and that sounds melodramatic, but really, for the first time in my life with a global pandemic, I can see that, even though there are other issues. The worldview is much bigger. I do this for my neighbor, not for me. And that's part of what gets revealed. And what you're talking about, or what I'm hearing when you talk about that, is really underneath it all is relationship. If we're not in relationship with one another and being able to invite one another in so that we can become more who God created us to be, we can help somebody else to do that. We find ourselves stuck in the midst of a pandemic, and we begin to say, how do we get out of this? Or when's it going to be over? Instead of being able to say, what do we do now to bear witness at loving God and loving neighbor? What is it we do now? So one of the things we talked about before recording this episode was that we know that there are churches that are really trying to decide about Vacation Bible School. And we know of one congregation or several congregations, but one of them that we were particularly talking about that have moved Vacation Bible School to a virtual platform. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, and when I think about that, and I think about their witness, what a wonderful way in this season to continue to nurture the children and their families, and having an encounter with Jesus and connecting with a local congregation, but doing it in a way that everyone can do it in their own home. And so they're making it as simple and as easy for folks to participate as they can. And to me, I look at that and I say, what a beautiful example of loving God and loving neighbor. What a beautiful witness that is to a community. So we've got two more things that we want to offer to you to think about in terms of what is your witness and getting clear on that question so that you can make a decision. And one of them is around the stakeholders. And Tim, you were talking about building and developing relationships and the focus of relationships. And this is a time as you think about your witness and what it's going to be, to stop and ask, have we connected with all of the critical stakeholders that are connected to our mission?
I'm sorry, I'm going to go back to Vacation Bible School again just a moment. But would we call critical stakeholders parents?
Absolutely.
Right. So
community members. Those are critical stakeholders.
Right.
Might even be people who care about children in the neighborhood. Critical stakeholders, anyone who is offering a summer feeding program to kids, they would be stakeholders when it comes to what you're speaking of with Vacation Bible School, because those are all people that you might be able to connect with to get the word out and invite them to participate. The answer might be no, but the common element there is everyone is focused on the children. Your specific focus, as we've chosen to express it for this season, on loving God and loving neighbor, how are you going to help them to do that? The example that we've offered is with a virtual Vacation Bible School. So,
and with my rambling there a few minutes ago about global and local, to move the church beyond itself, part of those stakeholders are in the community. The local community.
Right.
So would the health department be a critical stakeholder?
Absolutely. All of the first responders are critical stakeholders. Have you connected with your police? Have you connected with the fire department? Have you connected with a neighborhood watch community? Have you connected with the health department? Because there's some specific needs going on there right now.
Now, what kind of witness would it be to the community if people in the church were volunteering to do contact tracing? I mean, wouldn't that be a powerful witness of loving God and loving neighbor?
Yeah. You want to give us the last thing that we're inviting folks to consider as they think about the one decision that they must make in terms of what's their witness going to be?
You're asking me to do that one because it's the one I talk about the most, and that is, what are you learning about yourself and God and one another? That is a critical question because we are becoming who God created us to be. And so what are we learning about ourselves and one another in relationship to each other in the midst of this as we love God and love neighbor?
As we began this episode with the one decision that you must make, and that one decision being around what is your witness going to be in this time, for us, the decision that we made is that it's going to be around loving God and loving our neighbor. That focus is on following Jesus. It's about embodying the love of God that we know in Jesus through our communication, through our connection, through our resources to you, the leaders, and by extension to the local churches that you are connected to. Well, we try to stay focused there. Sometimes it doesn't happen, and that's where the learning comes in. And what do you do in those moments? You adjust and you move forward. So, Tim, any final thoughts that you have to wrap up this episode?
I appreciate the idea that we can talk about being focused on loving God and loving neighbor. As much as we feel like we've given up and that we don't have, that we've had to sacrifice things and put on the side, I think we have a tremendous opportunity to be a Christian witness in the midst of this pandemic. And I'm grateful for the reminders that we've even had for ourselves as we've done this podcast. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me remind you that you can find show notes at transformingmission.org/121. Now go lead a movement of Jesus followers. Bye for now.